All right, guys. Good morning to everyone, our online viewers, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press. I understand that today is a Wednesday, and I sincerely hope that you guys have had a great and productive work week so far. My name is Jotam Lim, the Growth Marketing Lead from Innov8tif, and welcome to our webinar. Just a brief reminder that if you guys have any questions or any concerns throughout the presentation, feel free to drop a question down in the chat box below, and we will be addressing them during the Q&A session later. So without any further ado, let's get started. All right, just let me introduce the speakers for today. I will be giving a brief overview of the digital banking landscape in the region. Angie, our regional business manager, will be discussing the practical and business aspects of digital ID assurance, while Shanghai will be discussing the technical aspects of eKYC to basically help us take a peek behind the machinery that makes eKYC work in the first place. So I'll probably start with my own session. Hopefully, by the end of this webinar, our audiences will be able to have a better understanding of the ASEAN digital banking landscape, how digital banks actually affect the existing customer journeys and banking operations, and how digital ID assurance is key in supporting this new digital banking landscape. I guess since digital banking is kind of mainstream, but there are several questions that are surrounding it. So I guess the biggest question is, what are exactly digital banks and how they actually differ from the incumbent traditional banks that we have around? A quick search online actually shows that there are very different definitions and based on which website you visit, but there are a few common themes here and there. It is basically consolidated over here in these 3 points. Banking needs to be both digital and mobile. This is a natural progression from internet banking in general. I mean, in the past, we have transitioned from bank tellers to ATMs, which then gave rise to internet banking on PCs and laptops. And now, today, in 2022, consumers want banking services right at their fingertips, via their phone, in their back pockets. So digital banks are built around this modern way of banking in mind. Second, digital facilities for front-end, back-end, and middleware services. So basically, digital banks aims to offer a truly paperless journey, not just for the banking consumers, but for the employees at the back-end operations as well. Before we proceed any further, I guess it's very important to clarify there are 2 types of digital banks. The first type is existing banks, incumbent banks, looking to expand their digital capabilities and offerings. And the second is fully digital banks that are actually built from scratch, which is another code name is called neobanks. And the reason why neobanks, which is fully digital banks, a huge deal, is because they offer companies opportunities to set up digital processes from scratch. Unlike traditional banks, neobanks do not have to inherit a banking system that is still relying on legacy processes, meaning that they do not really have to maintain 2 systems at the same time, nor do they have to worry about making sure that these both systems are actually jiving well together. So neobanks can put digital banking as the main and sole focus. All right. Finally, digital banks aims to replace physical bank presence. So ideally, for digital banks, consumers no longer need to visit bank branches to conduct any banking transactions or activities. On the other hand, banks do not really have to play the real estate game to actually find out where is the best place to set up the physical branches to reach the consumers, the target consumers they are reaching out to. Perhaps for digital banks, there could only be like one main headquarters for administrative purposes, basically managing the digital system and to house processes that cannot be automated or digitalized, such as like the risk and compliance team to ensure that all the documents are prepared properly and is authenticated. All right, so how does digital banks actually affect the current banking industry? So here's a quick mind map that I prepared. It basically affects in mostly 3 different ways. First of all, is a customer experience. With digital banking, customers can experience a 24/7 service, borderless payments, which means cross-border payments. For example, Do It Now, which is actually a cross-border payment solution between Malaysia and Singapore. You have paperless banking, like which I mentioned previously. And there's a new one, it's called invisible banking. Which is basically conducting banking transactions without even requiring user input via their phones. Even you can have banking transactions made through services like Siri or like Amazon Echo, for example. Second, digital banking opens up more digital channels, which means unified payment systems, cross-border and domestic, like I mentioned previously. You can actually save on overhead costs from KYC processes, manual inputs, manual verifications, which we'll explore deeper later, and also physical branch management, real estate costs, management fees, maintenance costs, upkeep. It's quite expensive to maintain a physical bank branch. And finally, automatic repayments. So with digital banking, the transactions can be done automatically as opposed to the traditional ways of having to conduct bill payments or money payments through physical branches via like kiosks or whatever. And finally, there's also data aggregation. Because everything is done digitally, there's always need to be a storage of the data somewhere. This translates to a much more personalized financial management for individual customers. It leads to open banking. Sometimes big data is a new oil, apparently, in the 21st century. So having a large amount of data doesn't mean that the banks and institutions can make full use of the data. What they can do is anonymize it and put it up to the public domain, and for open banking, for researchers, for students to actually work on that open financial data to gather insights that the incumbent banks cannot really do so by themselves. And finally, automated processes. In the past, when the documentation preparation, for example, loan applications, it's a series of steps. It's a series of checkboxes that needs to be ticked in order for a loan to be approved or rejected. Well, with digital banking, all those processes are actually handled automatically, digitally, without, in some form, it's like an RPA, remote process automation. All right, I guess despite all this lingo and all, the best way to actually illustrate the differences between digital and traditional banking would be to tell a short story. And I have a story to share. Basically, my debit card has actually expired just a few weeks ago, and banks have done a really great job reminding me to actually renew them. They keep SMSing me, they keep sending emails, hey, please renew your debit card. However, when I really try and attempt to renew my cards, all roads somehow lead me to actually visit a physical branch office. It doesn't matter if it's a customer hotline or email support, they still direct me towards the physical bank branch. Even the debit card kiosk for certain banks here in Malaysia, they operate on a 24/7 basis, but they do not really accept all kind of renewals. Like my card, in my case, is a hot card renewal because my card has already expired. So they kind of rejected it. So I still have to visit the physical bank branches during office hours. And even the online registration system is somewhat ineffective. Like it took weeks for the card to actually arrive at my doorstep. Even then, to be honest, I didn't even receive the card in the first place. So in a world where digital banks are set up properly, ideally, debit card renewals can be done online quickly through mobile phones, and cards can be delivered within a 48-hour window, provided that you're in a city area. In fact, for digital banks, debit cards might even be obsolete because e-wallets are kind of gaining prominence in recent years, kind of replacing the role where debit cards used to play. So in short, instead of having these many channels, there should be only one channel, which is a digital channel, which is the best channel in a way. All right, so now we have a better understanding of digital banks. Let's dive into the ASEAN landscape for a moment. So first of all, what's the deal with licenses? Digital banks and digital bank licenses might be two separate things. As a disclaimer, I want to point out that different countries actually approach licenses differently. In the most cases, digital bank licenses is mainly catered to non-banking entities because existing incumbent banking players, they already have the necessary licenses and infrastructure to set up digital operations in the first place. So basically, digital banking licenses give non-bank players a fighting chance. So what do I mean by that? So let's take a look at individual countries. Let's look at Singapore. In December 2020, they've issued out 4 licenses. As you can see here, these are the players. And by early 2022, this year, it should be operational at this point in time. However, a quick research online shows that there's still no digital banks here in Singapore. So where are they stuck? Basically, I just consolidate the points. It's mainly because of 2 reasons. One is strong incumbents. Incumbent banks are just too prominent. They have captured too much of a market share that consumers are not compelled to switch to a digital banking solution when their existing solution works really quite well. And the second is intense regulation. For digital banks in Singapore, they have high requirements like the amount of capital that needs to be stored. They have much more stringent requirements when it comes to financial management, when it comes to digital banks, since they are new entities after all. So locally in Malaysia, I believe that there's big news that in late April, just last month, we've announced a new 5 license holders. These are all the players you see up on the screen. Right now, we are in a period of operational readiness. It's going to take 1 to 2 years to set up operations to make sure that it's functioning properly before it's like fully commercialized. Next, Indonesia. There's 7 licensed digital banks here up on the screen. Some of them are actually neobanks. Some of them are actually incumbent banks partnering with several entities. There's also 7 more awaiting licenses in the pipeline in Indonesia. As for Philippines, of course, here are the digital banking players. In December 2020, they kind of released guidelines on how digital banks should be conducted. Just late last year, they have announced 6 digital banks. But right now, even after opening up the doors to these 6 banks, they decided to shut the door for another 3 years, apparently to preserve competition and actually to improve the quality of service, to give these 6 players some time in the market to do what they're supposed to do before they reconsider opening up the doors. Of course, there's other countries as well. In Thailand, BOT plans on issuing guidelines by June this year. We're still waiting for updates. Vietnam, they've already approved eKYC processes, but there's regulations surrounding digital banks in particular is still not like clearly defined. In Cambodia, currently there are no official digital banks or neobanks, but all the digital initiatives are still pushed up by incumbents. So there's still quite an active market over there. And for Laos, they are currently in the experimenting process. They have this system called BCAM, which is like somewhat like a digital banking system, which is like a branchless banking system. And they're right now, from the latest research that we've seen so far, they are in the process of trying to build up the necessary infrastructure, such as Unitel, largest mobile network operator, to actually meet the compliance from the central bank to actually develop this kind of digital financial services. All right, now that we have a better understanding of the landscape here in ASEAN, so what are the unique challenges that digital banks are facing? Of course, the biggest one will be the fraud. Fraud is always one of the biggest threats to the industry at large. Interpol actually released a report stating that ASEAN banks are actually the biggest targets of phishing scams by a large margin, along with Facebook. It's double and triple the amount. And phishing is dangerous. Here's an important point. Phishing is dangerous because it leads to identity fraud, which is a rabbit hole of a topic on its own. But to consolidate the points, in short, identity fraud is a big deal. It's because it serves as the foundation to set up criminal operations in the first place. So what do I mean by that? So think about it. What do scammers actually need to do their job? First, scammers require fake banking accounts to move finances around and to mask their movements. And secondly, cyber criminals or whatever, they need fake telco accounts to actually mask their communications. And both of these services, banking and telco, require false identities. So by tackling phishing scams, by tackling these phishing attacks, tackling identity fraud, and governments can have more control over the criminal operations, both domestically and internationally. From the graph on the right, you guys can see that ASEAN is also quite prone to ransomware attacks as well, which is the rise, over the COVID-19 period, with much of the attacks actually concentrated in Indonesia and Vietnam. However, do take this graph with a grain of salt, because no one really knows the exact figures of ransomware attacks, because many ASEAN countries do not really have mandatory reporting requirements. So companies hit with ransomware attacks, they might not be mandated or obligated to actually report it publicly in the first place. So do keep that in mind. Beyond fraud, there's also other challenges as well, such as regulatory compliance. So regulation in ASEAN is ever so changing. You might expect updates or changes to the laws every 2 years or so. For companies who are thinking regionally, if you're expanding operations in the entire region, it would be quite expensive and complicated to keep up to these ever-changing updates, especially if you have SOPs to updates and you have thousands of employees to retrain. For instance, like say, many ASEAN countries have issued out guidelines for eKYC in recent years, where they mention what constitutes as digital ID, what constitutes as digital documents, and guidelines on how to store, collect, and authenticate these measures. And they also have new anti-money laundering acts for good measure as well. So keeping up with these ever-changing updates is going to be very difficult, especially if it's done so manually through KYC processes, branch, etc. And also, more importantly, I guess digital banking will affect the end user customer experience, because it opens up a lot of few additional questions. One, how to enable seamless customer onboarding? How do they manage to authenticate users securely through their mobile phones? also to reduce reliance on paper verification. And how do they really enhance customer loyalty through convenience and service quality? And how do they actually prevent repeat offenders, high-risk individuals, maybe politically sensitive people or people with bankruptcy history? How do they actually manage to filter all of these people out? These are some of the new questions in the digital age. Well, I guess we do have some of a solution. Why not consider digital ID assurance? For a moment, consider the benefits that digital bank tries to bring to the table. You have 24 hours, 24/7 services. You have better convenience and better accessibility. And all of these benefits are built on top of processes which are automatic and paperless. But this cannot even happen without the necessary prerequisites, meaning you need to comply with regulation. You need to have the right technology to even enable these processes in the first place. And also proper stringent data management policies to make sure all of these are kept in the right place with the right security checks in place. So even after spending so much effort trying to please the end consumer to deliver these benefits that you see up on the screen, underneath it all, it doesn't really matter if the customers is not who they say they are in the first place. They could be spam bots, they could be fraudsters, they could be, maybe just children helping their old parents set up an online account. So digital ID assurance serves as the bedrock for banking services because banks are built around systems of trust. All right, since its very inception, way hundreds of years ago, IOUs are used as replacement for gold. It's because customers and users trust that these IOU papers issued by banks are just as good as gold. Now in the 21st century, this trust, it doesn't come in the form of IOU, but it does in a way, but it comes in the form of a reliable and authentic data, which can only be cultivated via a properly implemented and well-designed ID assurance system. All right, so to actually dive deeper into the topic, I will pass it over to Angie, who will be explaining digital ID assurance in much more detail. So Angie has a lot of hands-on experience in communicating with many different types of clients, each with their own unique pain points. So she'll be exploring the topic in a much more tangible and much more practical point of view. So over to you, Angie.
Thank you so much, Jotham. Okay. Thank you so much, Jotham, for the very insightful info on the digital banks. Very good morning to everyone that's joining for today's session. My name is Angie. I'm from the Regional Business Development team, and today, as said, I would like to actually dive a little bit more from what Jotham has shared and some of the key points that I would like to share related to digital ID assurance and some of the challenges. Okay, let's see. Today we're going to discuss the areas to highlight is the current issue, which mainly focus on the adoption of digital banking in Southeast Asia. Secondly, we're going to discuss on what are the challenges in digital customer onboarding as of today. And finally, to conclude with some of the effective costs and risk assessment to handle some of these challenges. Let's begin with a news article from last month. So let's start with the Philippines, where digital bank has already been implemented since 2021, as what Jotham has mentioned. And this article by CNNP Philippines, Bank of Philippines, says that it is ready to face the increasing presence of digital banks and fintechs. So for instance, BPI has provided new customers the ability to set up accounts, key features among the fintechs and neobanks. And next month, it will be offering a high yield deposits product aimed actually to digitally savvy Filipinos with no banks accounts yet. And interesting part mentioned here by the president is that to maintain our market leadership, we have to continue to make investments in technology to accelerate our digitalizations of our business and our operations, and to improve our customer offerings. So we can see here for digital bank player that has already operated since 2021, the main focus is still on improving the first level of digital customer onboarding. Okay, so let's go on the next news. So another article that I would like to pick here, last month by Philippines News Agency, which the Philippines Central Bank has given its point of view. Digital bank is also a big boost in empowering micro, small and medium enterprises, which accounts for around 99.6% of the business in that country. So the governor also mentioned to enhance regulation to promote a secure environment for digital banks. And these measures include the issuance amending information technology, risk assessments policy, particularly on the implementations of automated and real-time fraud monitoring and detection systems. Again, we can see that digital banks in the Philippines are actually emphasizing on the importance of customer onboarding related to the automated and especially on the real-time fraud monitoring and detection systems. Okay, next, in Thailand, however, well, among the major economies of Southeast Asia, it is the only country besides Vietnam that has yet to develop the framework. So as mentioned, it's going to be up tentatively on June, which resulting the impact of 800 Thai bank branches shuttered during the past year as reported by the Central Bank of Thailand. So this is a very recent news in this month. Bank of Thailand statistics shows that the top commercial banks that closed the highest number of branches over the past year as of the end of March are Bangkok Bank, we have SCB, TTB, Bank of Ayutthaya, Land and House Bank, and also K Bank. So there's actually observable belief that these commercial banks are closing their branches because most customers prefer mobile banking and very few over-the-counter services. And banks now prefer to set up their branches in shopping malls instead of independent ones. Again, we can see that there is a high demand of users that are interested to adopt these essential services digitally. And with that said, potentially there is more than 50% of users which is now tech savvy. So there's no reasons to left behind of not implementing any sort of digital customer onboarding. Meanwhile, other regions like Philippines, Indonesia that's already operating the digital banks. Cambodia has yet to have any licensed digital bank. However, some of these big banks has already started the initiative to actually implement the digital customer onboarding with manual verifications. So on some of our real use cases, we have witnessed that it does increase the number of accounts and depositors. However, the risk mitigation is still very important to protect the identity to prevent the revenue losses to the banks, of course. So as said in this article by the Interior Ministry General Department of Identifications, where he called on people to protect their identities at any cost, considering that they can be stolen and used for any gains of cyber criminals. So the ministry also added that many local cases of identity theft that have been reported to this department, example include the culprits using victims' identification to create the bank account, social media accounts, and also official documents for wicked purposes such as fraud and other criminal activities. So we could see the challenge here is that the more actively you are implementing digital customer onboarding, the higher you have to actually strengthen the digital customer onboarding to avoid any sort of fraud cases. And so based on some of these challenges that I have shared across the news, regional statistics shows that online fraud costs business about 22% of their revenue. And Philippines are on the first rank as one of the early country in Southeast Asia that operates digital banks compared to Malaysia, Indonesia, and also Singapore. So while Malaysia is still in the middle of planning and budgeting to operate the digital banks, and the fintech growth is also one of the main reasons that is actually ranked at certain place. Services like buy now, pay later, e-wallets, telco, any sort of e-hailing and so forth, these services are also leveraging on digital onboarding technology. So therefore, there's the different services offer a various method to actually identify the users based on the compliance risk appetite. So as we could see that with digital banks spawning across the regions, it's definitely benefits for the outreach market, yes, but at the same time, it's also an open gate to frauds and scammers, which evolve the same way as the technology is. So let's see some of the interesting common identified fraud based on real use cases experience. So we in digital banking and buy now, pay later services, we witnessed a very high quality of content tampering, on your ID card. For example, a photo or info substitutions on ID image which is well printed and positioned, impossible to detect by non-expert on digital verifications and commonly found in these industries. Secondly, a high-risk user with multiple attempts of account creation with fake user ID details. This high risk here referring to a pattern of the same user that has already have a history of fraud in other similar financial services. So in e-money or telco, the highest onboarding or scam syndicate with real user ID and informations, where we have seen a syndicate onboarding scam who offers a certain type of payment to any users that willingly provide their real ID informations. So there's also a larger group of the high-risk user that also create the multiple attempts of account creation with all these fake ID details. And for the use cases on the investment, financing, or even in insurance, the common fraud is obviously stolen ID and informations for financing applications, fake signature, fake documents upload. So these are some of the some of the common frauds that businesses may not be able to tackle, not without an expert of digital verifications. And frauds are always evolve with the technology, and there's always a way and method that can be compromised. So let's see, what are some of the risk measurement that can be implemented to strengthen the digital onboarding? So earlier, Jotham has mentioned the importance of the digital ID assurance. So we are talking about facial biometric authentications. We may have already know the methods of liveness detections in the market, but the key is to identify spoofing attempts, means no smiling, blinking, head turning, light flashing, or moving the camera, because deepfake is also one of the common digital fraud as well. Digital signature services is also a high demand services, especially during the pandemic, and is as important to also enable a certify the authenticity of the signature as well. AML, CFT screening. So traditional banks commonly has already required these services as part of the onboarding requirements. However, for digital banks, this alone may not be sufficient because the user is commonly an unbanked user, which why the next digital footprint analysis is important as well. So the trail of information using digital technology is what required by digital bank to actually access to this data in order to piece together and use it as part of decisions. Facial search or facial blacklist is also a very good method to ensure that the history of the same fraud users are not allowed to onboard in other types of services as well. So for example, if I have a history of submitting a fraud document to a company that provides microfinancing, when found guilty, my history data will be shown as an alert to other businesses as well when I try to submit to another microfinancing company. And lastly, the standard scoring may have been used in traditional banks for existing users. However, in digital banks, there's also other alternatives such as telco credit scoring, which they monitor the scores of the user mobile number for their payment behavior, usage, address, geolocations, and if the mobile number is even legit to the rightful owner. Because we can see in traditional bankings, these comments checks is also commonly used for people who are existing users. But however, in digital banking users, the target market definitely is for the underbanked market, especially if we're talking about Malaysian. I would say 90% of Malaysians already have a bank account. So why would they actually use another type of banks, aside from, of course, we are talking about high interest, we are talking about all the benefits and so on. But in another case, for the banks, for these digital players to actually identify the users and so forth, these are type of additional measurement that have to be key in for this type of underbanked or unbanked market. Okay, so just to recap, actually some of the many lists of the key success factors on a general way for digital banks: leveraging assets, scaling the bank, and sustaining the progress. But however, I would like to actually see the essential is still to have that flexible, and also the automated capabilities, especially in digital onboarding to reduce those fraud rates. So the main focus is still to automate the ID scanning, real-time documents, liveness, or facial verifications, and supported with the database verifications. So yeah, with that, I've come to the end of my slide. I hope I've shared some of the useful insight within this short period of time to any of the service providers out there, consumers that will be using and looking forward to actually the future of digital banking. So over to you, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
All right, awesome. Thank you for sharing, Angie. Actually, just looking at the chat box here, we do have a question for you that hopefully you can share your insights on. The question is, what is the difference between multi-factor authentication and eKYC? What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so MFA, multi-factor authentication. So it's mainly an authentication system that requires more than one authentication factor for successful authentications. Common example is using password together with a code sent to your smartphone to authenticate yourself. eKYC, okay, eKYC stands for the electronic know your customer. So it's meaning remote, paperless, a process that minimize whatever cost that the traditional KYC necessary process. So in another way, MFA, the common use case is when a user must provide two or more pieces of evidence to verify their identity to gain access, maybe to an app, to a resources. But eKYC is more than just authenticating purposes. So it comprises digital customer onboarding, digital ID assurance. This is to ensure that the digital users are who they are, who they say they are. So yeah, that would be the difference.
All right, awesome. Thanks for the answer. Just another reminder for all our attendees for today. If you guys have any questions of your own, feel free to drop it down in the chat box below. We will review them occasionally. So up next, we have Shin Kai, who is actually from our technical pre-sales team. Actually, just after this maybe 20-30 minutes conversation, eKYC may seem like magic at first glance. I mean, how on earth can we authenticate users with just photos and captured using our mobile phones? Mind you, these phones actually come in many different models and many different specifications. So to actually really explore deeper into the technical aspects of eKYC, I will pass it over to Shin Kai to dive deeper in this topic. Shin Kai, you're muted.
All right, sorry, I forgot I'm muted. Okay, so yeah, thanks, Jordan. And morning, everyone. So yeah, we are looking into the Huawei digital bank here. And it's a whole new paradigm shift, right, from the whole physical bank environment where you used to have your face-to-face. Now you have your face-to-screen. And this is the question kind of begs, you know, like, what do you know is happening behind the screen? Because when it's face-to-face, you know what happens behind. You can see what the person's doing. You know, if he's trying to fraud something, you can see it. But now it's behind the screen. You don't have any control on what the person is doing. So this is where the digital ID assurance can come in. And let's kind of dive into that whole idea of digital ID assurance. How to ensure that when this person trying to, you know, do some digital kind of process, that you can assure that his ID is actually who he say he is. And what actually the first touch point to actually touch on is actually on the digital customer onboarding, right? So this is the first touch point that you have with your potential customers as they onboard into your digital bank. And let's kind of take a look a little bit into the whole traditional onboarding process, what you kind of have to go through basically. So first, you want to get to know your customer, you get them to fill out your forms or maybe e-forms, and then they approach the counter to bring an ID together with them. And then your staff will then, you know, take the ID and make sure you verify they're the same person, the same face. And then you probably even get a photocopy of the ID for regulatory purposes. And then after all that, you probably tell your customer, all right, we'll get back to you in about a couple of hours or probably 1 or 2 days after some processing. And then they'll kind of process to say that, okay, this application is good to move to the next step, which is then the background check, right? Because you receive whatever you can get from the customer, now you want to perform your own background check. And then after that, finally, after everything, after a couple of hours or probably even a few days, you would then process and say, okay, this customer can be onboarded. And finally, they're onboarded into your system. So where does eKYC come in, which is electrical know your customer? or rather, where does this whole idea of the digital onboarding process comes in? So I'll share a little bit on the eKYC components that it covers each of these points that you see here in the traditional onboarding process. So the first one, which is the getting the information via forms and all that. We have what we call optical character recognition technology nowadays, whereby it's a technology that can actually capture the information that's present on your ID, your name and IC, and populate it automatically into a form for you. And then from there, you can then get your customers to fill out the remaining items. And that's where you get to digitally, very smoothly as well, get the information from the customer. And for Innov8tif, we have what we call OKID for this. That's the component that governs this. And then we have the other portion, which is the face verification portion. So now that you know a little bit, you've seen the ID of the person, but then now you want to compare this person's face on the ID and the person's actual face that is trying to submit this submission. So to do that, you need to get the selfie of the person, and you get to compare the selfie together with the ID image, the face on the ID card, to make sure they're actually of the same face. And by doing that, you get to further verify, okay, this is very likely the same person as well. And then you also have what we call a liveness verification feature, simply because the selfie being submitted could be a selfie that is taken from actually a screen. You can pull out someone's Facebook post and take photo of their face, right? So that's something else that is also taken into account. And this is governed by OKFace and OKLive, respectively. And although you have already seen the ID card earlier of this person, how will you tell whether is it authentic? It may be just a fabricate, it may be something that's captured from the screen. So this is where we also have a technology nowadays that can actually verify for you to say that this ID actually looks like a real physical ID, or this ID actually looks like a photocopied ID, or this ID looks tempered, and this kind of things is actually also checked. And this is governed by OKDoc here. And then the second last process of consolidating all this information you have earlier and to say whether this person is good to be moved to the next process of the onboarding. We have what we call a scorecard that basically just automate all this process to come back to you with a very actionable results. Something you can see whether it's clear or suspicious, something you want to outright, you get to move on to the next process, or something you can very safely actually reject this customer as well. And then of course, finally but not least, you then can have your background check, which is actually something is now automated and it's integrated into your system, into the whole process. So this whole system you see here, this whole flow here will eventually be a smooth flow. Actually, it's something you see in this slide. So you can see the customer from the left-hand point of the view of the slide. Yeah, you can see that you just progress towards the right of the whole process, and then eventually we get to return to them the onboarding result and say that, hey, welcome to our digital bank. You are now onboarded to our system. All right. Of this though, there is probably two kind of categories we can still further link into. One is the ID verification. Basically, you verify the ID in terms of what the customer can give you. I'm giving you, this is what my IC looks like, this is what my face looks like. So you can then verify the person from what he can give you, the ID verification portion. But then there's also a second category whereby it's more on the background verification. What can you find out about this person despite on top of what they can give you? So you can check, their credit scoring and all so on and so forth. So let's kind of dive into the first part first, a little bit just to touch base, not so much of how exactly it works as well, but also what kind of problems that that may arise and where technologies nowadays can come in to actually take place and kind of address this kind of situations. So yeah, for the ID verification, OKID. So this is the OCR portion, the optical character recognition portion. So you can read all the information from your ID card, and it's not just from a Malaysian ID card that you can see on your left of the slide, but this also involves actually to the whole ASEAN region, many other countries as well. So Singapore, Indonesia, Cambodia, you name it. And not only for ID cards, but this also involves international passports. So it covers a very wide variety of this kind of OCR portion. And where this can come in a good benefit in, I guess, to the delight of digital banking is that you won't have your typo issues anymore. Imagine the handwriting and typing in wrongly. Now you have something that's automatically extracting all this information for you, auto-populating it in your form, and ensuring that you don't actually have the kind of typo issues, which can cause some customer friction eventually down the road. And the next thing is OK Live. So this is the portion I mentioned earlier. What if, I mean, you don't know what's happening, behind the screen, right? From a face-to-face and now face to screen. So what's happening? The screen portion behind the screen, this is where the OK Live can really come and tell and say that, is this face, this selfie that this person is trying to take behind his screen, does it belong is it actually of a real face? Or is it actually he's trying to put out a picture or putting up a screen, trying to spoof someone else's face? I mean, as we know, it's so easy nowadays to go to someone's Facebook profile picture to pull up a picture, blow out on the monitor, and then you just capture a picture, right? You can seem like a selfie. But this is where we have this liveness verification technology. In this particular case, it's called OK Live, and it's actually built on CNN, which is convolutional neural network. Or in very layman terms, it's just basically artificial intelligence. It's built to study to say that, does this picture that's presented to us, does it look like a real face, or does it actually look like something else? And this is something also, as NG mentioned earlier, is very relevant because deepfakes is now on the rise as well. And this is where you can really tell, OK face or the liveness verification technology can tell this doesn't look like a real face and can actually return it to you as well with this information. And then, of course, we have OK face. This is basically just the facial verification component to compare with the face between the ID and the selfie. And perhaps one very interesting thing that to bring up here is that facial verification technology is actually still quite known for their ethnical bias or skin complexion bias, what we call. And what I mean by that is, for example, if this technology is built particularly in, let's say, for example, a China market, whereby the technology, the database that they use to build this whole system is just based on the Chinese population. Imagine now bringing this whole technology to the Western side where you have a lot of Caucasians and they have slightly different facial features and all that. The performance of that facial verification system would actually can behave very differently because there are actually some difference in the facial features and all that. So that's what they call of ethical bias, or actually skin complexion bias, or probably even facial structure bias. So this is where OK Face comes in, and it's tested actually and proven to work in a multi-ethnic population with a variety kind of skin complexion, skin tones, and even with different religious practices, particularly, let's say, for Muslims who wear headscarves, right? And that's something as well, OK Face has been proven to be able to take this kind of situations and conditions as well. And I'll actually quickly move on to the OK Doc portion. So this is the interesting portion. It might be the case where most fraudulent attempts will come in. So I'll spend a little bit more time here. So the document authentication verification technology, what it does is to ensure that this document being presented is actually of a real document and it's not tampered with. And there's a few categories how this kind of relates to. So the first one is visual compliance. What it checks for is, does it look like an original copy? So it's going to check, does it look like a photocopy ID? Does it look like a screen copy? Does it even have the necessary landmarks there? Let's say, for example, you have a more amateur syndicate, that produces an ID that's it's kind of subpar and doesn't have the necessary landmarks, or the landmarks looks off. This is where the visual compliance component can come in and really nail on the check whether everything looks in place or not. Secondly, we have the security feature detection. So the security feature detection is something it can be present in some or most national IDs. So in Malaysia in particular, we have a hologram detection and microprint detection. So you can see the second picture on your left. It's a hologram that's shiny bits. So that is a really difficult thing to fabricate. And also we have a microprint, which is the first thing on the first picture you see on the left, which is a very fine print of words at the background of IC. And this is something that's actually painted by Innov8tif Solutions as well. So these are just to name a few of the security feature detection that OKDoc can pick up. There's one other category here, which is the content tampering detection. So what if, example, you have actually a genuine ID? So, right, you're going to pass through, but then you start tampering, you start putting things on top of it. So let's say I take my sister's ID, I put my passport photo of it. Seems like a genuine ID, right? So this is where as well the OKDoc can come in and still actually tell you that something's been tampered. So it can be tampering of ID number, tampering of passport photos, you're just trying to edit your address for some reason. These are the things that can be checked if you're trying to tamper with. So this is one of, as I mentioned, one of a more hotspot for fraudulent activities to happen. And this is where OKDot has been proven over the years to really help and prevent the onboarding of such fraudulent identities. All right. And of course, eventually what you have then is the consolidation of all this information. We come back to you with a scorecard to tell you whether this person is clear, basically good to go, suspicious, should be outright on board, rejected, or cautious, something that risks a bit of further maybe manual verification or further checks want to be performed onto it. I won't touch so much detail on that, but that's just something we have. And of course, when you have all these detail, you might be kind of overwhelmed. Wow, that's quite a lot of information here, right? We do have actually a platform in place to kind of tie all this everything together as well, so you can see everything in one platform. All the submissions that has been gone through, the transaction monitoring speed, and even generating reports such as FAR and FR reports, which is false acceptance rates reports and false rejection rates reports, which is something quite a lot of regulatories are actually looking for digital banks nowadays. All right, so that's just to add a little bit as well. So we've seen a bit on the ID verification. So what about the background verification? You've seen what the customer can give you. What other further checks can you do behind the scenes in an automated manner, right? So this is where OKDB comes in. The OKDB is short for OK Database. That does all your background verification integrated actually and automated as well. So there's 3 portions here, some of which I think you are quite familiar with. I'll just go through it briefly. First, we have credit scoring. Second, you have anti-money laundering. And thirdly, you have a digital footprint analysis. And for credit scoring, so something very familiar, basically you get to obtain the credit information or the credit scoring of a particular customer from actually a credit reporting agency, a valid credit reporting agency, and you get to view it and to make your decisions based on this. And then of course you have your AML and CFT, where you get to get the AML reports as well, and where this person is actually politically exposed, and so on and so forth. I won't touch too much detail. I think it's familiar with everyone. This is something maybe I will touch a bit more on, which is the OKDB digital footprint analysis. So what this is basically you get to check a little bit on the digital footprint of the person, right? So what this actually does is, for a customer, when a customer gives you their email and their mobile number, for example, you can then use this information to check whether this is tied to certain online platforms. And if they are somewhat tied to certain platforms such as Google and Facebook, then you can have a bit more confidence to say that, okay, this person seems like quite a valid identity, providing valid information. Because if it's a syndicate style of trying to mass produce emails and mass produce numbers, they usually aren't tied to a particular account online platform as well. So by having this is a good indication, actually, not so much a binary yes, no, but indication to further say that, okay, this does look like a valid information of email and a number that this person is giving you. On top of that, just want to touch a little bit more on the other features that may be present and also can be really, really helpful, not just for onboarding, but also for the continuation process, continuation of your ongoing everyday process of a digital bank. So one of these is a blacklist face search. So imagine if you have a blacklist database and you want to ensure that every customer that you have is checked with this before it's onboarded. You can have a blacklist face search whereby you're taking the selfie face of the person and checking it with a database of faces you have to see whether it matches anyone. If it does actually matches someone in your database, then you can really clearly say that, okay, this person is blacklisted, right? And then finally, secondly, you also have a digital signature. So this is not just electronic signature you see on your PDF, but what it also does, a digital signature here, is that it ties with a particular certificate here, a certificate that is authorized and recognized under the Malaysian Digital Signature Act, whereby it is something that when I do this, it is something irrefutable. So someone cannot come to me and say that, you signed this and I cannot refute it, so I didn't. Because it's actually tied with a particular certificate that can only be validated by me in that sense, something that only I can kind of create, that something that is actually given by the certificate authorities in Malaysia. And this is not just helpful for a customer to be onboarded, but it's also helpful for the ongoing process in terms of your loan application. So now you do not have your physical branches, you don't have, you can't be meeting a person to get a signature. This is where you can get your loan application managers to sign off in a digital manner and a very secure manner as well. And last but not least, we have our facial biometric authentication, which is something that, if you can imagine, nowadays people are taking very seriously on multi-factor authentication. You have your passwords and then possibly even OTP and so on and so forth. But you can have also, what you can also have is also a facial biometric authentication, whereby every time a person logs in with the password, you can also take a quick selfie really quickly and then authenticate the person, and then it gets to go through, and you don't have to wait for that OTP, right? And it's an additional layer of security, and it can be done not only for logins, but also imagine for transactions, maybe above a certain amount, or even changing of security informations. So as you implement this as a multi-factor authentication, it really does give the security not towards your own bank as well, but actually towards the customer as well. It's something that we can feel as well as customers to feel that there is this feature there, and I do not have to worry so much about someone trying to fraud their way through. And with that, actually, that marks the end of a little bit of insight of what's happening behind the scenes. And with that, I would pass back to Jotham for the session.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Angie and Shinkai, for your insightful comments. Again, just another reminder for our audiences to submit your questions down in the chat below if you guys have any. So on the screen right now, there's also a QR code link to the webinar slides that you can see here today. So if you guys need some materials to maybe share with your own team, to your bosses, to your stakeholders, feel free to download the webinar slides through this link below. And if you guys cannot access this QR code link, I will be sending the actual physical link via email to inboxes very soon. Actually, I've gone through there is somebody asking a question, Mr. Kalai Shelvin. I'm not sure whether I've butchered the name. I'm really sorry about that. Does OKDoc support verification of other national ID? How about passports? Thank you very much. Okay, that's a very good question. And the answer is yes, we do support a whole list of documents. I'm not sure whether I can share my screen. I'm unable to share my screen, but never mind. I will put a link over in the chat box where everyone can access. Hopefully everyone can see the link in the chat box. Under this link, we have a whole list of the supported documents that OKDoc actually supports. So including in this list, we have from countries like Brunei, Malaysia, Cambodia, China, even Hong Kong even. So take for Malaysia, for example, I have it on my screen. We have our IC, our identification document. We have our driving licenses. We have our OKU cards. We have the military cards even. We have driving licenses and everything. Let's say for Singapore, we also have their NRIC front and back. So the whole list of documents is available within that link below here. So also for Shankai, there's actually a question for Shankai as well. How accurate is your company's document and facial recognition feature? Can you shed some insight on this?
All right, sure. If you're looking at it in a more statistics point of view, maybe this is a bit more helpful, so I'll share it from this point of view. The Bank Negara Malaysia, which is the Central Bank of Malaysia, actually has a kind of a threshold as well to say that your system, overall eKYC system, should have an accuracy of 5%, rather, for better term, is an FAR, or false acceptance rate of 5%. What this means is basically that not more of 5% of fraudulent type of cases should be onboarded, right? So in this case, that's 5%. Below 5% is something set by Bank Negara Malaysia. In innovative terms, what we have done over the past year or so, or a few years actually, is that we have managed to achieve less than 1%. So that's way below the 5% set by Bank Negara Malaysia. And we are actually striving to keep getting the numbers down. Basically, to say that fraudulent activities is getting much harder to be onboarded. Yeah, so that's just a really rough indication. But obviously, it kind of depends as well. Sometimes if you give an ID which is in pitch black darkness, almost pitch black darkness, we can't expect our system to work very well, because my own eyes can't work very well as well. So we're expecting, let's say, if you're talking about a relatively good quality, this is what you can expect, something less than 1% of fraudulent cases. Yeah.
All right, thank you for your answers. I noticed, like, if there's no further question, I'm checking out the Q&A boxes and all this kind of stuff. I think there's not really much further questions. If there's no further questions, I think we should end the session for today. Once again, thank you guys for joining this session. Feel free to reach out to us via email or social media if you have any other further questions regarding our company, or if your company is actually interested in implementing eKYC as part of our pipeline, because we have many different implementation methods. We could either help set it up from you from scratch, or you can just get it through purely our APIs. We can have a further discussion regarding this. So again, thank you for your time, and cheers, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.